Kum learning a block Gemara. We are up to Daf Yud Tes Amid Aleph, and the Gemara by the two dots right in the middle of the page. This is the sugya of Pesel Hayetzim in Sukkah, which we learned already a little bit before. It was brought up before in the beginning of the Pedic. So Tana we learned right in the middle of the page. Pesel Hayetzim in Sukkah. So the Braisa says that Pesel, which is kosher as chach, that extends from the sukkah. We'll soon see what Yotzim in the sukkah means. It literally means it steps out of the sukkah. Nidonk sukkah is treated like a sukkah. What exactly does it mean? The Gemara will give a number of interpretations. My pesel hayotzim in sukkah. You know what it means? Kanim hayotzim la'achayde sukkah. We're talking about sticks that go beyond the sukkah, and therefore, and I tell you that even that section is also kosher. Ask the Gemara. What being a shoulder to find is you need three walls, how could it be kosher? So we had some bedika. In other words, even though this is on the other side of the wall, but we'll see, but there are walls that continue traveling together with this additional schach. So you need the walls to be 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. Bedika there is. But being into loss of chamasa, the schach itself has to have more shade, provide more shade than sun. Bedika there is. Look, remember what's a chiddush. So what's if you perhaps extend the schach and you extend the walls, and you have the middle wall there that works for both sukkahs. So what's the big deal? I would have thought it's talking about a case as follows: that originally you built the sukkah with a wall at the end, and then you decided to continue the schach and you extended the walls. So that original wall was meant for the interior of the sukkah, the other side of the sukkah. It wasn't built for the new side of the extended schach. Perhaps doesn't work. Kamashmallah does. That's what Rashi learners doesn't understand. Why would you think it wouldn't work for the other side? So perhaps the pshat in Rashi is, in the case of a house, which you learned before in our Mishnah, that we're using the walls of the house for the sukkah in the courtyard. Those walls are also meant for the house. But because those walls are permanent walls, they're so permanent so they can be used for anything. Here, because this wall, the middle wall, is all temporary walls, only to last a week, and you built it for the sukkah on the one side, perhaps you cannot use this wall for the sukkah on the other side, like extended schach. You could. That's one pshat. So when you extend it with the walls, they both say, we're talking about the Bekani Mayetzim Lifnim in HaSukkah. Now, we're not talking about the other side of the wall. It's the very same side of the sukkah, but what you did was you extended the schach, and you extended one wall with it. One of the walls that on the side you extended, but the other one you didn't. I would have thought that since you're not extending the other wall, the part that you extended doesn't have 7 tvachim, let's say, with a kosher sukkah, that does. In other words, even though normally we say all you need is 2 walls and a tefach, so what's wrong? Why would you think in this case the third wall is more than a tefach? So you extended one wall. Because we would have thought, wait, I understand Rashi, that since you went out there and you extended one of the wall, after you built the sukkah and you built them all the same measurements, same width, then you extended one wall, and the other one you didn't, it looks like you're trying to say at the time, I'm not interested in extending the sukkah, I'm just extending the wall. Because initially you had both walls ending at the same place, and now you extended one of the walls. So I would have thought that you're trying to make a statement that only where that wall is, it's not really a sukkah. Mashlam, that it is. That's interpretation number 2. We're talking about the sukkah sheruba tzilosa melechamos, the majority of the sukkah more shade than sun. Umiyut, and part of it chamos merum tzilosa, there's more sun than shade. So I would have thought tiposel behachput. I would have thought that this section of the sukkah that doesn't have more shade than sun. So I would have thought that it should be possible in that little bit, Kamash Malon, comes to teach you that the entire sukkah is kosher. So what do you mean, Pesel Hayotzim min HaSukkah? Umayotze, what do you mean, Yotze? Yotze Mehechshe Sukkah. He says it goes out that even though it's Yotze Mehechshe Sukkah, that even though that it's, what do you call it? It's not kosher schach. It's not kosher in the sense it doesn't have more shade in the sun. Still, nidan kesukah, it's still kosher. Even that section is still kosher. Fourth pshat, we're talking about you have literally posel schach, not that you have more sun than shade. So the schach itself is kosher and just not insufficient amount. We're talking about a case where the schach itself is disqualified, it's makabel tumah, it doesn't grow from the ground, but it's less than 3 tvachim in a small sukkah, where it's kosher. And the din is that sukkah is kosher. What do you mean yotzei? Yotzei. So what do you mean pesel hayotzei in a sukkah? That even though the schach is yotzei in a sukkah, yotzei mitoid sukkah, it's not just that it's not insufficient amount of schach. The schach itself is posel. Nevertheless, the sukkah is kosher, even though it's a small sukkah, because it's less than 3 tvachim. Masking what Rabbi Isha asked, what's the big chiddush? You're telling me a chiddush that if you have posel schach 2.5 tvachim wide in a sukkah, 7 tvachim, the sukkah is kosher. And if you had open space, we learned before that open space is stricter than posel schach. Open space is posel by 3 tvachim, and posel schach is posel by 4. So open space is stricter than posel schach. And by open space, 2.5 tvachim in a small sukkah is kosher, even though it goes entire length of the sukkah. So of course, 2.5 tvachim posel schach is kosher. What's the chiddush in the brayso? Asking what a masker of Asia, let it even be Abed, which is so strict. The Abed Pachas Mishloisha Tvachim Besukah Tana be puzzle. Abed less than 3 Tvachim. Is it puzzle? So surely Pasal Schach is also. I say it's kosher. So surely Pasal Schach less than 3 Tvachim. The sukkah is kosher. Abed Abhabi says when we say that posel schach is tree like a sukkah, there's a cooler here that you don't have by Abed. And what is that? Omle Abba zem mitztarev v'yishenim tachtov. Zem mitztarev v'ein yishenim tachtov. Big machlek Yishem had on the pshat. Let's learn how Rashi learns first. Rashi says that when it comes to avir 2.5 tvachim, yes, the sukkah is kosher, but you cannot sit in that area where the gap is and eat there. However, when it comes to posel schach, if the sukkah is kosher, you can sit under the posel schach, and you can be yotze. Yeah. That's what and what's the logic? We'll see in a minute. Tosfos says exactly the opposite. Tosfos says, what are you talking about? Tosfos says that if it's avir, he says you could sit under it and eat. And if it's posel schach, you should not sit under there and eat. No, the machlekes Rashi and Tosfos is, how do we understand the concept of lavud? According to Rashi, the concept of lavud means if it's less than 3 tvachim, it's kosher, because that's the halacha. It's still open space, but open space less than 3 tvachim, lavud, it's as if it's kosher. It doesn't bother us. So, but the fact is, it's open space. How can you sit underneath there and eat? Mashenkin, if you have 2.5 tvachim or posel schach, you're allowed to sit there and eat because it's bottle b'reiv. That's Rashi. Tosfos learns the opposite. Tosfos, you know what lavud means? Lavud means as if it's filled with kosher schach. That's what we had yesterday, that suffix. If you have 2 tvachim of posel schach on either side, is lavud connected to? Or we just imagine that, so if it's kosher schach on both sides, it pulls into the middle? Or do we imagine as if it's filled with kosher schach, because overall the sukkah is kosher? So, Boteja says lavud is filled, and therefore you can sit in that open area and eat. But if you have posel schach, then you can't. The fact is, you have posel schach. There's no lavud that you take it away. It's sitting there. It blocks the lavud, and you cannot sit under posel schach. And then Tosfos wants to say a third way, that maybe in a large sukkah you can sit not only under the open schach, but even under the posel schach. It's only in a very small sukkah where you don't have the shear. The problem is you don't have the shear. That's why. But in a larger sukkah we have the shear, that you can even sit under the posel schach. Then you have a machlekes rishonim within that you're not allowed to sit under posel schach. Let's say, is it posel schach that is, or according to Rashi, that you're allowed to sit under posel schach? Rashi holds you allowed to sit under posel schach. Is it only posel schach less than 3 tvachim, which is the case in the Gemara, or as long as it's less than 4 tvachim? Because we know 4 tvachim makes it posel, less than 4 tvachim, the halacha is that it's kosher. So what's the din then? Can you sit there or not under 3.5 tvachim of posel schach? And someone to say there's a difference if it's a small sukkah, because that's what the Gemara is talking about, versus a big sukkah. In a small sukkah, no. If it's greater than 3 tvachim, it's no good. But in a large sukkah, you can. Anyway, interesting discussion. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. The way Rashi learns, the Gemara asking, so you're telling me that the avir is a sukkah's kosher, and yet you cannot sit under the avir. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The terufim is tarif. you're telling me that the open space, allows you to have to sit there. The sukkah is kosher, and at the same time you tell me, but you cannot sit under there and eat. How can something be kosher and yet you cannot use it part of your hechsher? You're going to use that to make up your 7 tvachim sukkah. So you're going to say, oh, I have 2.5 tvachim of open space. That's part of the kosher sukkah. And then who else made kosher? But then you say that it itself is not kosher. It doesn't make sense. Yes, we find a similar example. We find tit hanoraig. We find in the case of cement, let's say, or mud that is watery, or prutu. That you could use it as part of your 40 saw and say, oh, well, in the mud also is part of the 40 saw, there's water there. And yet, if the entire 40 saw is made up of this mud, also like tefillah, it's not part of the tefillah, it's not a good tefillah. And yet you can use that as part of your 40 saw. So we do have a concept of something is kosher, and yet if it's part of something else, but not if you're going to isolate that part and just use that part, you can't. So if you're going to sit, taka the 2.5 tvachim of open space can be part of the 7 tvachim kosher sukkah, so overall the whole sukkah is kosher. But if you're going to sit only a majority of you underneath the 2.5 tvachim, it is not kosher. Says the Mishnah, if you make a sukkah, we already had this before. If you make a sukkah, like we said, people who trap birds, so they sit in this like a hut that is it's tied together on top. And we said also the ropes are tied on the bottom. It's like a semicircle, like a circle, and it doesn't really have a roof. So, or basically, you put a mat, or you put against the wall, So it's all on an angle. It's not a vertical and then perpendicular that you have schach. Just all on an angle, a 45-degree angle. So Rabbi Eliezer says, with Neshein Lagag, where's your roof? All you have is a wall. And the Chachamim say kosher. Chachamim say that part of that will act as a wall, and part of that will act as your roof. Says the Gemara we learned, Moide Rabbi Eliezer is Moide, she make bia mina karka tefach. In both cases, in the case of the tzarif, in the case of the what do you call it, of the thing like against the wall, if you lift it from the ground 1 tefach, so you created the concept of schach. Remember before, in order for a roof to be a roof, it has to have elevated a tefach. So the moment you lift a tefach from the ground, machlek is whether you have to fill the entire tefach or just to lift it with 2 posts at the end. But the moment you lift from the ground, now you have a roof. And once you've created a roof, then you have a roof and you have the wall because it's all in one piece. Or in the thing leaning against the wall, you move it away from the wall by a tefach. Is kosher. What is the reason? What's the reason that Rabbanon? So what's the Rabbanon? Why Rabbanon say that's kosher shipui? Only Rabbanon hold that even though it's on a slope, we'll say part of it is a wall, part of it is schach. So according to many poskim, we're talking about a 17 tvachim thing that's leaning against the wall. So the first 10 tvachim will say is considered wall, and then the next 7 tvachim will say is considered schach. Others say you don't need that much. Abai asked Rabbi Yossi could go to Mikil Sani, but Sukah Abai when found Rabbi Yossi was singing there. I remember that Sukah had a canopy like a bridal canopy where there's pegs on both ends of the bed, there's posts on both ends of the bed, and then the curtain is draped downwards. So there's nothing flat, there's no roof, just draped downwards inside the Sukah. In other words, he felt I'm not sitting inside a cover beneath the Sukah. It's as if there's no roof there. In other words, if it's a slope, there's no roof. In other words, he paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. I'm like, come on, Rabbi Eliezer. Shafkit Rabban, the Rabbi Eliezer. I understand you left behind the Rabbani, you follow Rabbi Eliezer that this is not considered a roof, and therefore you're allowed to sit like that in a sukkah. If actually thought the opinions are turned around. Tony, we learned Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi one says kosher. Chum place, Chum say puzzle. In other words, it's not considered a good schach. It's not an oil, and therefore lying underneath that in a sukkah is not a problem. Says so. He said to him, "Okay, so you have 2 versions: the Mishnah and the Brayse. Shavkid masnisin ba'avdik Brayse. So you've forsaken the Mishnah to follow Brayse. The author of this Mishnah is actually is a single alone opinion. The Tanya we learned. If someone makes a sukkah like a tzif, like this is a Mishnah, Rab Nosson oimed that Rabbi Eliezer paisel. Rab Nosson is one who is Rabbi Eliezer apostles, and our Mishnah is word for word verbatim. So therefore, the author of our Mishnah is Rab Nosson. That's why it's not universally accepted. Mishnah. Ein lagag chachamim machshir. For the Brayse was more accurate than the Mishnah. Interesting. Usual whole idea of a Bryce is that it's not as accurate as a Mishnah. Here you have an example where the Bryce is more accurate than the Mishnah. Okay, the next piece of the Gemara is a major controversy in the whole world today. And a lot of Rabbanim are very lenient. Don't know exactly understand how, why, but this is how it is. So let's see what the Mishnah says. Machatzelas. You have a mat of kanim. So you have a mat made out of reeds. Gedola, if it's a large mat. What's katana and what's gedola? Katana means a mat that's as long as a person can be. So it used to be that mats were made to sleep on, like a hammock, or they made a mat, and that people used to sleep on top of the mat. So that's called a katana, and a gedola is much larger than that. So if it's meant to be used for sleeping, then it's a keli, and it's mekabel tumah, and that cannot be used for schach. If it's not meant to be used to lie on, but meant more to use it as a partition or something like that, then or a roof, whatever you make it for, so then it's not mekabel tumah, and it can be used for schach. So we're going to make a difference between Gdoila and Ketana, but the Mishnah starts out, doesn't make that distinction. This is what it just says Gdoila, it's mentioned Ketana. So Machzelas Kanim Gdoila, if it's a large mat. Also L'shchiva, if you made it to sleep on Mekabelas Tumah, then it's Mekabel Tumah, you cannot use it. Why? It's a keli. And you know, use it for schach. The aim is Sachaba. Now L'sichuch sounds like from the Mishnah we're talking about the same mat. And we're just saying, depends what you had in mind. You had in mind for lying on it, so it's a keli mekabel tumah, you cannot use it. But l'sichuch, if you had in mind to use it for schach, then misachim bo, you could use it for schach. The eine mekabelos tumah. If you had in mind to use it for schach, then it's all right, not mekabel tumah. But that's what you had in mind. The problem is that what happened? You had nothing in mind. You just went to the store and bought it. It's not clear. It's a contradiction. First part seems to say that it's only possible if you had in mind for shchiva. Stam is all right. And the second part seems to say only if you had a mind for schach is it all right, but stam is not all right. And that's going to be a problem with Gemara. And Gemara is going to try to answer that this is the Mishnah actually talking about two different cases. The first part is talking about Gedola. By Gedola, automatically we assume it's kosher unless you clearly had a mind to lie on. And the second part is talking about a ketana. And by ketana, naturally, it is for sleeping unless you clearly had a mind for schach. Okay, that's how we'll see later. Gemara wants to interpret the Mishnah. But let's continue. Rabbi Lezer says, "Achas ketana, achas gedela." Whether it's a small one, whether it's a large one, also l'shchiva. We'll see later what the machlekes says. Also l'shchiva. If you deliberately made it for sleeping, then mekabel tumah. I don't care what size it is. The aim is sachim do yischach. If you had in mind l'sichuch, then it's all right. The aim mekabel tumah, then it's all right. Again, so what's going on? What about if you have nothing in mind? Not clear again what he's saying here. So we're going to see later that maybe a gedola stam, you generally buy it not for shchiva, and only ketana stam, it is for shchiva. And a gedola usually is used for a roof or something. Let's start in the beginning. Mishnah Haguf Kasha Amid. You say also shchiva if you deliberately made it for shchiva, for lying down, for kabel tumah, don't use it. They misach, but time it does shchiva because you had the wrong thing in mind. Hot shlama, if you had nothing particular in mind, l'sichuch. Shlama will say it's for schach. That means it's kosher. So you have nothing in mind, kosher. And then you say l'sichuch. Only if you had in mind for schach is a kosher. Misach, but when kabel tumah, time it does l'sichuch. Hot shlama, but stam shchiva. Says the mother holei kasha. That doesn't bother me. Kam big doile, kam big tana. Depends if it's a large one. And depends if it's a small one. Yeah, what by a gedola we're going to say that stam by gedola is for schach, for covering. So only if you had in mind shchiva is a problem. And by a ketana, and the second part where he says that also the sichur of ketana stam is for sleeping on. So it's mekabel tumah. It's only if you had in mind clearly schach is it kosher. Okay, so says the Gemara. What do you mean? How we learn the next part of the Mishnah? Blazer says, I don't care what size it is. Also, the shchiva, you had in mind shchiva mekabelos tumah, which means stam, it's not mekabel tumah. They misach what time it is shchiva because you had in mind clearly to sleep on. It's a keli hostama l'sichuch. Okay, and he clearly says, I don't care if it's big or small. Amos Sefer, look at the end. It says also the sicher only had in mind schach is a kosher. Misachabo the eine mekabelos tumah. Taimo, the only reason why it's kosher is also sicher hostam l'shchiva. So how are you going to stand up a lezer? And you can't make this distinction of Gedel and Tani Mei Minigo because he clearly opens up achaz ketana achaz gedela. And actually, Rashi's Mishnah Gish and our Mishnah is Achas Gedoyla v'Achas Ktana, and that's relevant, as we'll see later. Elo Rabba says, Rabba, I'll tell you shot. Big Gedoyla, Kuli, people comes to a large mat, there's no argument, just everyone agrees. A large mat, probably you made it to be a roof, and therefore you can use it for schach, unless you clearly had a mind for shchiva. Ki pligi big Tana. They're arguing only by a small. Tana kama saba Tana l'shchiva. A Tana automatically is for shchiva is makabel tuna unless you clearly had a mind schach. But Ablezer saba, Ablezer holds stam Tana nami l'sicha. Ablezer holds that a stam Tana also for schach. You need to clearly say, I'm not doing it for schach. To make it tummy, I'm doing it for shchiva. And this is how you read the Mishnah about Ablezer. You Tanakama Zeka. Everyone agrees a large mat is not meant for lying on. You can use it for schach. They're arguing regarding a small mat. Tanakama says a small mat, stumble l'shchiva. You have to clearly have in mind you're doing it for schach. Comes along and Rabbi Lezer says, Machatzel is a large mat. Also l'shchiva mekabel stumble. If you had in mind shchiva, it's mekabel stumble. Otherwise, when it's time, it's all right. They misachiba. The only time it's a problem with a large mat is the also l'shchiva. You made it to be like a mattress. Hostama, but if you have nothing particular in mind, it's for a roof. Nasa kimisha also l'sichuch and mesachvik yudus chach. What about katana? What about a small sukkah? Okay, the Mashal says you should cut this out. Let's cut it out. But also Rabbi Lezer, maybe comes along Rabbi Lezer and says no. Achas gedela, achas tana, but achas gedela. Whether it's a small one, whether it's a large one. Stomach ksheida l'sichuch. Whether it's a small one, whether it's a large one, stomach is ksheida l'sichuch. Minastam, you could always use it for schach, or even a small one, only if you had in mind clearly otherwise. Abaye said, if so, Rabbi Lezer says, so no, they all agree by G'dayla, and the Chiddush is by Ktana. So he said, I understand. Rabbi Lezer says, the first you always mention that which is Pashut, and then you mention the next one. Rashi gives us different. Rashi is saying like this. The Mishnah says Achas Ketana v'Achas Gedola. Yeah, it should have said Achas Gedola v'Achas Ketana. First you say the given. First you say what we all accept, the Gedola, and then you say Ketana. That's the same thing like the Gedola. So that's what it should say. You're saying that they all agree when it comes to Gedola. They're only arguing on regarding the Ketana. So it should have said Achas Gedola, whether you agree with me, and Achas Ketana. And the Ketana, I say, is the same like a Gedola. That's what he should have said. If what you're saying is correct, way Rabbi learned Pshat is everyone agrees a large mat is kosher. The only argument regarding a small mat is stama l'shchiva, which is a Tanakama, and Rabbi Lezer says no, stama is for a roof. And furthermore, it sounds like the mission they're arguing by G'dayla as well. But Rabbi Lezer l'chumra, where do we see that? If we say the B'raisa, in fact, they're also arguing. You're saying they're not arguing G'dayla. It says clearly they're arguing by G'dayla as well. And Rabbi Lezer is the one who's strict. You're making Rabbi Lezer more lenient. Rabbi Lezer actually stricter. The time when the B'raisa machzelas aktani, when it comes to a mat made out of reeds, big G'dayla, a large one, misachiba, right? You can use it because we minastam. It's not meant to be a mattress. It's not for a keli. Rabbi Lezer says im eina mekabelas tu misachachim. Rabbi Lezer clearly says even a large one, only if you had in mind to be schach. So Rabbi Lezer argues by a large one, and he even says then also you have to have in mind schach to stumble the shchiva. Elo Rapapa. Papa says, I'll tell you what pshat is. Big Tana, the way we learned before, but I'm going to tell you how to learn Rabbi Lezer as well. The way we learned in the beginning. Big Tana, when it comes to a small mat, everyone agrees a small mat is no good unless you clearly had in mind this was schach. What's the definition of a small mat? Large enough for a person to lie on. Keep pleading when they are going to be a mat larger than that. Tanakama, so Tanakama holds stam gedayla l'sichuch, a larger mat you can assume is for schach to cover the roof and therefore it's all right. Rabbi Lezer says so. About stam gedayla nami l'shchiva. Rabbi Lezer holds that a stam of gedayla also is a problem. Umay also l'shchiva dek'amar. So what do you mean? He says if you made it for shchiva l'chayr, Rabbi Lezer holds that stam even a larger mat automatically is tamim mekabel tumim because it's shchiva. What he meant was hachakamar. Stam asiyasa nami l'shchiva, as if even though you didn't say also l'shchiva means automatically it's made for shchiva ad the oven l'sicha. Let's say clearly say you're having in mind schach. So obviously, so it would seem from here that the halach is that a large mat you can buy because you assume it's for cover, and a small mat is only if it's made l'shem schach. So all the mats out there generally are considered large mats because it's much larger than just the size of a person. It's much wider and I guess longer as well, if you can get it longer. So in halacha comes out as this. First of all, you have to look at minig hamakom. What do they do with the mats? Is it used for a bed or not used for a bed? And do you look at the minig hamakom where you buy it, or do you look at minig hamakom where it's actually made? Machlek is there as well. And according to Rabbi Yeshaya, if you bought it, doesn't matter what was manufactured for it. When you bought it, you had in mind for schach. That's good enough. Doesn't matter when the manufacturer did. Others disagree. They say you look at the manufacturer. So what's the problem with the mats today? So you have a number of mats today that have a hechsh on it, and then lately you have the Rabbanim, including the Lubavitch Rabbanim, come out and say, oh, you're allowed to buy any mats, walk into a hardware store and buy any mat you want, which obviously is a lot cheaper. The problem with that, which I don't understand how they rule what they rule unless they know how it's manufactured. So you have to know how it's manufactured. The problem is as follows. Let's say a mat that is being sold in Bunnings, and the mat is a large mat, and usually it's used as a partition, like a screen in the door, or as a roof. If it's used as a partition, it's not so simple, because a partition can be considered mekabel tumah, because you might wrap yourself with it around you. So those that give hechshedim try to make the mat slats a bit thicker than the ones you can just buy in the Bunnings as let's say blinds. But I'll tell you what the real problem is. The real problem is what's holding them together. That's really the problem. Because we pass in the Shulchan Aruch, as we'll see later in the second paragraph, a dover maimed has to be from kosher schach. So you need something to hold all these slats together, right? String, rope. What actually is holding together? If what is holding it together is something synthetic, then it's no good. You cannot use it. If it's a thin piece of metal or something that goes all the way through, you cannot use it at all because the thing that's holding the slats together is dover mekabel tumah. So you have to make sure that whatever it is not synthetic, but something that grows from the ground. The problem then is the following. For example, there's a big machlek in the poskim. This is important. Also, even the hechshedim. Some of the hechshedim, like star K, we cannot use because they use a thing. They don't use a string that comes from the ground. They use string that's not straight, not braided, but single thread string. And the reason for they doing that is because according to Rashi, braided makes it mekabel tumah, but single thread is not. The problem is, but there's a synthetic, and they're relying on b'di'evid, a dover maimed. If it's something that is not kosher l'schach, is good enough. But the chatchila it shouldn't be. So they're relying on that b'di'evid. So you have to be very careful whose hechsher you're using. The problem is a lot of the hechsherim use cotton in Febet hechsher right now. If you walk in, sometimes it's made out of cotton string, which grows from the ground. It says that you shouldn't use some of these strings, chavila, ropes, made out of things that grow from the ground. There's still many of them you shouldn't use. Why not? Why not? The Alter Rebbe Pasmashal, the reason why not is because if you cannot recognize that it's something that grows from the ground, then it's a problem. Then you cannot use that as chach. As Alter Rebbe says. Even though it grows from the ground, it's not mekabel tumah. But if you cannot recognize, Alter Rebbe says why you cannot use hemp and all that is because you cannot recognize where it came from. Another svara is given is because we're scared if you're allowed to use that as a dover maimed, you'll cover the whole sukkah with that. So we're not worried then if you can have cotton string, you can cover the whole sukkah with cotton string. But if the reason of Alter Rebbe, according to Alter Rebbe, then because you cannot recognize it grows from the ground, you cannot use it as dover maimed. So it becomes a big problem. When you go into a Bunnings and you buy a mat, what is a dover maimed? What is holding it together? And it's vital. Without that string, the whole thing falls apart. So that is a dover maimed, and therefore it's very important to see what it is. And therefore you should definitely get with a hechsher, and you have to make sure the hechsher is all right. Because I just told like Star K, I saw clearly in their writing that it's synthetic, but because it's single strand, it's all right. That doesn't help us. It doesn't help us at all if you cannot recognize it came from the ground. So you have to get something like natural You see this quite a few chachmats that have hechsher on it, have like natural kind of a string, and I guess somehow or another you can tell that comes from that's grown and not synthetic. Anyway, it's a very controversial thing, and got to be careful. Everyone have a good day. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem.